Vice President J.D. Vance stepped onto the stage. His presence was calm yet commanding, the demeanor of a man who had faced far greater battles than a television interview. But across from him sat Marcus Bennett, a journalist known for his razor-sharp questioning and open disdain for Vance's political transformation. Bennett's producer had assured Vance's team that this would be a fair conversation about the new administration. But as soon as the pleasantries were exchanged, it became clear that the real agenda was something else entirely. The gleam in Bennett's eye wasn't one of curiosity. It was the look of a hunter who believed he had cornered his prey. "Mr. Vice President," Bennett began, his voice slick with artificial charm. "Let's talk about your remarkable journey, from being a vocal critic of President Trump to now serving as his second-in-command. Some would call that growth. Others might call it political convenience. Which is it?" Vance leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable but confident. "That's a great place to start, Marcus," he said smoothly. "Because it speaks to something bigger than politics. It speaks to the American capacity for growth, for learning, for seeing things through new eyes." The audience leaned in. There was no defensiveness in his tone, no attempt to dodge the question. Bennett, momentarily caught off guard, shifted in his chair. "Growth and learning?" Bennett scoffed. "Or just convenient timing?" "You see, Marcus," Vance continued, "in America, we honor the ability to change our minds when presented with new realities. When I first spoke out against President Trump, I was looking through a narrow lens. But then, I saw what his policies did for the very people I wrote about in my book, the forgotten Americans. I saw real results, and I had the courage to say, I was wrong." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Bennett's expression tightened, but he pressed forward. "Speaking of changes," Bennett said, shuffling his notes, "your recent speech at the National Prayer Breakfast emphasized divine guidance in government decisions. Isn't that a dangerous mix of church and state?" A hush fell over the studio. A loaded question. But Vance's eyes glimmered. He had been waiting for this one. "What I actually said," Vance replied, "was that our founding fathers understood the importance of moral guidance in leadership. They weren't afraid of faith. They were afraid of tyranny." A soft "Amen" echoed from the audience. Bennett's lips pressed together. "Surely you see how this could alienate those who don't share your beliefs." Vance's voice remained steady. "Marcus, when I served as a Marine, nobody questioned the presence of our chaplains. Nobody scoffed when we bowed our heads before a mission, because in those moments of truth, even the skeptics understood. There's something greater than ourselves." Bennett shifted uncomfortably, but quickly pivoted. "Let's move on. Your loyalty to President Trump, you once called him unfit for office, and now you say he's God's instrument for America's renewal. Don't you see the contradiction?" Vance chuckled, shaking his head. "What I see, Marcus, is a media obsessed with contradictions instead of progress. You want to focus on words I said years ago? Fine. But I choose to focus on what's happening now. The resurgence of American industry, the empowerment of working-class families, the strengthening of our nation." Bennett opened his mouth to interject, but Vance pressed on. "Here's what I find extreme: that the media seems more concerned with questioning a leader's faith than reporting on policies that actually help American families." Thunderous applause erupted. Bennett's frustration was palpable. His plan was slipping through his fingers. "Fine," he snapped. "Let's talk about your background. You claim to represent the working class, yet here you are in an expensive suit, defending a billionaire. Doesn't that reek of hypocrisy?" Vance let a small smile play on his lips. "You know what I see, Marcus? I see a man who thinks a suit changes a person's values. Let me tell you something. The values I learned in Middletown, Ohio, from my grandmother, from my neighbors, don't change based on my job title or zip code." Bennett scoffed, his frustration now impossible to mask. So, you're saying your complete reversal on Trump has nothing to do with political ambition? He paused for effect, then sneered. That you're not just his puppet? A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Vance's gaze didn't waver. That word, puppet, says more about you than it does about me, Marcus, Vance said, his voice laced with steel. In your world, loyalty and respect are things to be mocked. But let me tell you what I learned as a Marine. You judge a leader not by media narratives, but by their actions. I've seen President Trump's actions firsthand. I stand with him not because I'm a puppet, but because I believe in his leadership. Applause thundered once more, drowning out Bennett's feeble attempt to regain control. He glanced at his producer, who was now frantically signaling to wrap up the segment. You know what your real problem is, Marcus? Vance continued, his voice carrying the weight of truth. It bothers you that someone like me, a man from a small town, a Yale graduate, a Marine, can think for himself. That I don't need your approval to have convictions. That I see through the game you're playing. Bennett's face turned red. You're twisting my words. No, Vance replied smoothly. I'm just holding up a mirror, and I don't think you like what you see. The audience roared with applause. Bennett sat in stunned silence, his carefully planned ambush reduced to rubble. As the cameras zoomed in, Vance turned to the audience, his voice steady and resolute. To every American who's been ridiculed for their faith, mocked for their values, or told they're on the wrong side of history, stand strong. At the end of the day, character isn't about pleasing critics. It's about staying true to what you believe. With that, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and strode off the set to a standing ovation. Bennett remained seated, his script in tatters, his authority shaken. And in that moment, one truth became undeniable. When faced with arrogance, the greatest weapon is dignity. And when confronted with bias, the strongest response is the unshakable power of truth.